Agile merchandising, probably, if agile was a word that had been used 25 years ago, would have still been the right word to use, because you always want people who are responding quickly to whatever customer demand you've got. The challenge we have now is that with so much data and information available to the merchandiser, it becomes harder to put into practice. So there's lots of ways that a good merchandiser can speak to both the buying and design teams in the early stages. If you don't spend the time at the start of the process, then further down the line, you're going to be firefighting all the time. There'll be lots of challenges that you haven't preempted. Have you started them off giving them a framework to work within? That's not a straitjacket, it's a framework. You want to give them a bit of context about how much do you sell of a certain type of end use. So again, when we look back and use our data, it's not about saying I must buy 10,000 of this exact item. It's saying, listen, last year our customer was from this sort of product category, the customer was looking for these different end uses. Maybe if your customer price is important, and therefore there's a certain balance needed between those exit price points and the entry price points. Trying to spot the trends or patterns that really mean something ongoing, not those flash in the pan moments that you've got to make the most of, but what can you do to help your design team, your buyers do their job in the best possible way. So it might be about saying, listen, this category has to be high margin, just so that when we're thinking about designing, we're thinking about where we're going to source it from. It could be saying, look, this area is really volatile. Sometimes it's great, sometimes it's not. So let's have a flexible supply base from that perspective. So our real question is, how do we free the shackles and allow the merchandising teams to get back to what they are good at? And that's really where you need the support of modern technology, but also the support of a great leadership team that doesn't ask for every bit of information every single hour of the day, that allows you to say, well, what's important in any given moment? So they're the two things. It's to say, well, what's important? And then to say, well, how can any sort of systems that are on hand support having the data in front of us so that we can respond to whatever that data is telling us about the customer's current and then hopefully future behavior. Any chief executive is really important because they set the overall goals and targets for the business. So it is important to have those really clear business goals. And then it's important for any of those further levels of leadership to also set what's really important for their areas of responsibility. As a merchandiser, you've got all your key lines, and it's easy to spend all your time going through those key lines. But if 80% of them have behaved how you expected, there shouldn't really be a job to be done. You've prepared that forecast, you can then just keep working on it. It's important then to spend your time looking at the 20% that perhaps have overachieved or underachieved, and actually what are we going to do about those, and what impact does that have elsewhere? So the skill now becomes identifying what hasn't behaved in line with expectation, and how do you respond to that performance. In certain examples, you can say, well, actually, there's 20% of at a category level, maybe 20% hasn't performed how we expected. And within those categories, 20% hasn't performed how we expected. So all of a sudden, you're only actually looking at 8%. I do a quick bit of maths in my head there. Actually, only 8% of your range is being looked at rather than 100%. So that's what it is. All of us have only a fixed number of hours in the day. And you have to work out, what do I need to do in those hours? What's important? We're helped a bit now as merchandisers because taking too quick decisions can be a bit of a challenge. So the returns are now much higher than they used to be. So responding to week one demand can be a little bit of a problem. It's good to be responsive, but if all of a sudden 80% of what you sold has come back because the fit isn't quite right, or the fabric isn't as it was, it looked online, then actually you can be caught out and have done too much too quickly. So, you're given great data, you've got the information to respond to it, but then there's always checks that you can make. So perhaps it is getting out and seeing what it feels like in store, going and seeing, well, that style's done incredibly well. Let's go and just get some customer feedback from the store staff. Let's perhaps say, give it a week. What do the returns say? Are we seeing those returns? If not, fantastic. Let's respond to the demand. So it's always important to think about what other factors do I need to take into account, and it will depend on what you're proposing to do. Am I about to turn around and buy 20,000 of it, or am I going to just do something that's a bit more targeted to a smaller market? It's about balancing up how big of a decision am I going to make, and really making sure we've got real great confidence, and perhaps being a bit more light touch on some of those other ones. It's certainly right that you've got to be quick and agile in your decision making, but you've also got to have in the back of your mind a couple of what ifs, which says, well, what happens if that huge demand was driven by a great social media post? What happens if, as I said, the quality isn't quite, or the fit isn't quite what you expected it to be? So all of us have had great products in hit 1 that haven't delivered in hit 2. And trying to understand why that happens, and therefore responding correctly to that demand, is important as well. Understanding your supply base as well, because all of us have also had people who we've placed a repeat on, and it hasn't come in when you said it was going to come in, and all of a sudden that's caught you out as well. So that's one of those beauties of merchandise, and that's why it's important, is because we're the protectors of, let's be sure that we're making the right choices. Let's ensure that we're thinking about what's the right thing to do with the information that is in front of us. Price is a great lever, and it's probably the one which has the most impact on customer demand on an existing product. If you take some money off, it's easy to see it, see the demand increase. But you also have to think about what that means for the next product. Is the customer going to be expecting that same discount on the product that comes after it, and the product that comes after that? So price can be a great lever, as long as, again, we talk about having great priorities set from the leadership of the team, of the whole business. So the leadership needs to set about the relationship that the business wants to have with its customers on price. How do we want them to respond to price from us? Is it that they should only expect those discounting in those fixed periods? Should we be saying to them, you can always come to us and have some sort of bargain if you're looking for those products that aren't quite the ones that everyone's after? So it's a lever, but one that has to be understood in the context of the wider business. Then what I would say is a great merchandiser challenges that context and says, actually, we really need to do something. I've got a product category that really is overbought and it isn't as good as we thought it was. We need to do something. And that could involve a change of plan of the priorities of the business. And that's right to put that challenge back. Trying to predict where the demand is going to come is hard. It's easy to say, I think we're going to sell 1,000 a week of an item, but then you've got to say, well, which different stores or which online markets is it going to come in? What sizes are going to sell in each of those markets? So the more you can get it right up front, the better. But then also, can you keep more back in your DC to be as flexible and as responsive to that customer demand as it comes out? So trying to ensure you end up with the right stock in the right place at the right time, as always, is the backbone to any good merchandising. I had to drop that one in. But on the, when should you transfer between stores? Your challenge there is, it's not at no cost. So there'll be a financial cost of transferring stock, but there's also a time cost. There's a time cost both from the store staff spending their time doing that activity when they could be either serving a customer, replenishing the shop floor, doing all sorts of activities, adding value to the business. And obviously then you also normally have a time cost between that stock being in one store and arriving in the next store. So it's going to be very dependent on those factors. How quickly can you move that stock? What is the time cost to that business or to that store team of moving the stock? And how confident are you that you're going to sell that stock in the new location as well? There can be nothing worse than taking time and cost to move a product from one place to another place and have the same end outcome of still haven't sold it. So if you're sure you're going to move it, then it could be worth it. And also remembering, I guess, the value of that stock. It's more likely that trying to take a £500 coat, a £400 coat is worth doing something about than it is taking a £10 t-shirt. I get annoyed by this more than any other thing. Stock being in a warehouse and never being put in front of a customer is a terrible place to be. But also putting stock in a store that then it can have a few things. It can stop the store from operating how it ought to, and that's a terrible thing as well. So you've got to keep, store teams have huge amounts of things to do nowadays. They're perhaps, doing order from store, fulfill from store, alongside the traditional role of actually trying to serve the customers coming in the door. They might have those click and collect parcels. So you don't want to overburden them. You want to make the environment they're working in as easy as possible for them. Every store team will say to you, I want all the sizes. And it's easy to bow to that pressure and say, yeah, here you go. A really good merchandising team say, no, actually, you're only going to sell that. I've got very much a maths background. I like to think, well, what's the probability that you're going to sell one of that in this week, or in the time it takes to go from you being able to sell that item and get that item back in the store. It's about saying, how much am I prepared? How much am I prepared to put into that store based on the demand I think is going to happen? And now on your core sizes, there can be nothing worse than on a core line, on a core size, the customer not being able to have their demand fulfilled. On a fringe size where there's not great expectation, if you've sold one in the week and you only expect to sell one every 10 weeks, maybe it's not the end of the world. You're going to get back into stock in 3-4 days time. So actually what is really important for the business is how quickly can I get back into stock. That's why you talk about the importance of lead times from your supplier into your DC. Equally as important is how quickly is your lead time from your DC into your store. How quickly can you respond to that demand? And actually then you talk about what can a system do for you. How much can it say, well, actually, can I preempt what that demand is going to be and make a suggestion of how much stock you ought to be holding? So that's where I'm at. Keeping the flexibility is important. You don't want to give up easy money, but you don't want to throw stock at a low value returning item. But again, it does depend on what is your customer's expectation from your brand. How many alternatives to that line have you got? Are you doing a big marketing push of that product? So, as always, there's a few key factors, and that doesn't have to apply to 100% of your range. But there'll be a small number of items you'll say, listen, we're really going to push this item hard. It wants to be at the front of the store, let's say, or there's going to be a big marketing push on it. And in that moment, you want to potentialize on that, the extra demand that will inject, and therefore how you're going to behave and how you're going to respond to that.